Dr. Sara Pugh, thanks for coming on the podcast. Could you begin with an introduction of who you are and what you're interested in, please?
Okay, I was originally a biochemist. I did biochemistry and genetics, and then I did a PhD in protein folding, and that's encompassed biophysics and fluorescence. And then I worked on statins and cholesterol. But in the meantime, I also worked on other small projects like you do when you work in science. After that, I left science because I was horrified at the way science tries to pay people to produce data that is going to either promote food we shouldn't be eating or medicines. Mine was statins, and that's why I decided to leave. And this was a long time ago, I think in 2008. So I then moved into working with clients. I started off teaching Pilates and doing hypnosis. So I have like a big interest in how the body moves biomechanically. And then again, I have a big interest in consciousness, which ties into sort of quantum physics as well. And then the Pilates evolved into functional neurology, which is more about the neuronal wiring in the body, which again, I got more interested in the eye and the vestibular system and the brain. And I found out about quantum biology and light probably sort of 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was, I bought some blue blockers, the True Darks from a company, and then I wasn't massively versed in it. And then over the years, I've got more and more interested in light and water and magnetism, both from a biology perspective, but also from sort of a more metaphysical perspective. And I carried on with all of my biochemistry. And I don't deny for 1 minute I've used lots and lots of supplements. I don't really anymore, but it was just part of a journey. And I'm also trained in medical ketogenic diets. And at this moment in time, I'm staying with a friend who has a daughter who has seizures and other situations. So all of my skills over the past sort of 20 years have been perfect for the environment I'm in now. So I think I'm interested in how do we apply the principles of physics to a biological system, because there's so many confusing research papers or methods or things on the internet. So I always break everything down into protons, neutrons, and electrons, and try and work with biology in that way to help people. Because I'm breaking it down to the most basic thing I can understand. I know there are particles like neutrinos and quarks below that, but that's beyond my level of intelligence. And I think also it would be too confusing for people. So I'm all for explaining how physics can help people with a variety of problems, even the physics of how we move, because again, biomechanics is based on mechanical physics. And to maybe move away from this paradigm that biology is at the top of medical treatments and how we should approach the person, and we should shift quantum physics, maybe not mathematics, but solid state physics and things up to the top of the pile in order to help people. And then another aspect of this, something I really am into and have always been into, are mitochondria, because I came across them when I did my degree. And again, anybody who's studied a science degree, you'll have been told that all mitochondria do is they make ATP, the energy currency of the cell, which is actually not the main energy source in the body. And people have neglected the fact that the deuterium depleted water that mitochondria make are sort of one of the key components of why 85% of mitochondrial 85% of diseases are mitochondrial problems. And it's not just the fact they don't make enough ATP, it's the fact that they're not making enough water, but also a mitochondria is sort of like a little sun inside us, like it produces like a kaleidoscope of light frequencies. And there's sort of 10 to the 36 different gears or possibilities. And then we have our sun and our moon, which again produce light, and that's like the kaleidoscope of frequencies that come in from the outside. So it's one of these phrases I always say, as above and so below, as within and so without. I've even got a t-shirt of it. So it's this idea of the mitochondria being like little mini suns inside the body, and how we use light, not just from the sun to perform important hormonal activities and set our body clocks, which are important, but also how the mitochondria can then use light to talk to the immune system. It can control our nuclear DNA. And again, when I did genetics, the mitochondrial, I was told the mitochondria have some of their own genes, and it was like one sentence. Whereas now it turns out that because there are so many mitochondria per cell, their DNA outnumbers ours sort of by thousands, and we've just been looking in the wrong place as usual with genetics. So I've got a wide range of interests, but when it comes to actually how do I apply it, it's all very well having theories and talking about physics, but how do you transfer this information to, say, a person who's got an autoimmune situation, or somebody with obesity, or somebody with diabetes, or a pregnant lady, or somebody who lives somewhere like the UK or Scandinavia where there's a problem with the sun. So it's not just, it's about how do I make sure that it's actually scientifically accurate to the best of my knowledge, but also to make sure it can be transferred into things which people can actually do. And I found you, Owen, because I know you did a podcast with Jack Kruse, and you talked about living in the UK and doing quantum biology, and then pretty much like a week later I had an opportunity to do a podcast. It's not released yet, but he mentions you in your podcast. So again, I think it's a good subject to maybe move on from, to ask it back to you. How did you get into quantum biology? And again, you live in the UK. I'm not in the UK at the moment. I moved to a different latitude, closer to the equator, not just because Jack told me to. It was actually for another reason, to help a friend. So maybe you want to give your view on quantum biology in the UK or colder countries, which would include Canada and then New Zealand in the winter as well.
Sure. I guess I haven't really been in this for that long. I think it was the Andrew Huberman, Jack Kruse podcast that I first heard this. Actually, no, that's not right. I first came across Jack Kruse because I was actually making a video about like sunscreens and sun exposure, just from, I think, just my general interest, because I heard some of these like dermatologists saying you need to wear sunscreen inside even in winter, and I was like, this is just wild. And I found a video of Jack Kruse. I think I kind of didn't think much of it afterwards. I saw a video from him, it's just like a short clip from a podcast, him basically just saying how he thought sunscreens were stupid. And then I saw his name again, because I'm aware of Andrew Huberman, and then I think he retweeted the thing, and I was like, oh, it's Jack Kruse again. I recognize that name. So I listened to it, and how many months ago was that? I don't know. It's got to be like, it's got to be 6 months probably, at least.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure I did a podcast after him. Mine was carried on. My first one with him carried on from the Huberman podcast, and that was something like April. And theirs was out before mine, so it could have been March, or I don't know when they recorded it, because it wouldn't have been released straight away. But we'd say early this year, early 2023.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I came across it as soon as it was released, but yeah, it's been a good few months probably now. I'm not sure if I'm that qualified to talk about, would you say, like how people should do it at a high latitude?
Yeah, well, I think it's one of these things. What's made you kind of carry on going down this journey? Because I know with the Huberman podcast that he introduced like how important melanin is in the body, not just it's not just a suntan. It's also like part of our semiconduction system, but also melanin can break down into electrons, hydrogen and oxygen, so it's like an additional energy store. And also we talked, I mean, the podcast was 10 hours and it was edited down to 7, and there was a lot of talk about the non-visual photoreceptors in the body. So this would be like in things like cholesterol and vitamin D, those kind of molecules that and vitamin B12 as well, how this light show happens in the body. But again, it wasn't the full sort of story. And also he talked about deuterium and how it's an isotope of hydrogen, and it's twice the size, and how it can steal our energy. And also this idea that people find very hard to understand, that with an organism in biology that's losing energy or under distress, it actually gets bigger. like, a swollen ankle gets bigger, cardiomyopathic heart gets bigger, and then a human, when we leak energy, we get bigger. So it was, again, a different perspective on obesity and weight. But it's like, that I've just scratched the surface. It's something it's well worth a listen, because it's understandable to people, but I had to watch it 4 times or listen to it 4 times, but there's something in it for everybody. And Rick Rubin was a really good sort of non-scientist referee in there that sort of brought things back so that the lay person could understand. And I think in that podcast, they did talk about what you mentioned. It's not just sunblock, but also wearing contact lenses, because again, our eyes and our skin are surfaces, and that's how we get the information from the sun. And then it's like by nonlinear optics, we act as a photomultiplier, so the information can get to the mitochondria. So if you wear sunglasses inside and sun cream, you've blocked your connection to the sun. And he definitely mentioned the sunglasses, and the contact lenses will do it as well. Or just being inside behind glass is another way to disconnect yourself from the kaleidoscope of energy from the sun. So that's a good listen for people to move into.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the thing that kind of really, I think, set me on this journey, because like the first time I listened to it, I probably understood like less than 5%, maybe like 10% or something like this. But I was aware of Andrew Huberman, and I thought what he's trying to do, like bring science to more people so they can actually use it to improve their lives. I think that's really respectable. And I just heard multiple times throughout the podcast Andrew Huberman just being like, oh, I can't believe that. Like, of course that makes sense. And I could just tell that something that Jack was saying was like quite profound. The bit about like the blue light receptors inside the brain, I thought was interesting.
Yes, the melanopsin. Yes, and it's like that ties back into how we can produce our own light ourselves, and it's a fundamentally important part of communication. But yes, definitely it was good. And I think because Dr. Huberman studies cephalopods, and you can see the light show in their brains. So there was lots of times when he did wow factor, Andrew Huberman. But it was, and then Rick kept bringing it back to make it more relatable to the lay person.
Yeah, but I think it's just such a great. It's like kind of one of those things, once you see that lens, like you can't unsee it. And I definitely still have like so much to learn and so many different rabbit holes to go down, but like it just almost relates to everything, and it just like makes a lot of sense in many ways to me. So yeah, you talked about, well, me and Jack talked a lot about kind of living in the UK. But before we started recording, you actually mentioned that there are certain benefits of actually being in the UK or like a higher latitude. Can you go into that a bit, please?
Yeah, first of all, when it comes to deuterium in the water, the further away from the equator you go, the less deuterium there is in the water. And again, the deuterium is the heavy hydrogen, and a bad biology pivots around too much deuterium. So it's naturally occurring, but when it accumulates, it leads to all disease, because it breaks the ATPase in the mitochondria, so that it damages them, but it also affects the semiconduction in the protein and water network, and it can also integrate into different hormones and make them not as functional, because the body doesn't recognize it, the deuterium as a hydrogen. So just the take-home message is, the more deuterium you've got in your body, the more sick you're going to be. And there's numerous studies on this. Dr. Laszlo Boros has done a lot, and Dr. Stephanie Seneff as well. So it's, again, something that's been brewing in the literature. It's just something people haven't heard of. So one advantage we have in the UK is we have less deuterium in the water. So that, and then the further you go towards the poles, say Iceland, is going to be even more deuterium depleted. Also, being able to use cold as a therapy or is hugely valuable. So that would mean, from a very basics, for people who've not think that you're meant to sit inside with your central heating on, that's a terrible idea, because you're making yourself warm adapted. Whereas we do need to go outside and in the fresh air, open windows in the winter, turn down the central heating. But you actually need to immerse yourself in cold, or so for example, there's chances to swim in cold water in the UK. Even at this time of the year, people still do it, because there's a lake near me that people go in, and people go in the sea. And the reason, and you don't need to do that. You can just put cold water in your bath and get in it in the UK with a window open, or any other country where it's cold, or you can put ice in the bath if you're living somewhere warmer. And from a hormonal level, the cold thermogenesis is really helpful for insulin resistance, because it's very helpful for making more brown fat, and brown fat is Mother Nature's answer for diabetes. Then it also is really helpful for leptin sensitivity, because leptin is higher up than insulin in the hormone hierarchy. And leptin people think of as just an obesity and weight hormone, but it actually controls fertility and bone density and the immune system as well. So with cold exposure, you can become more sensitive to leptin. But just bear in mind, leptin is a circadian hormone. So if you're not seeing sunrises and morning rises and blocking blue light at night, and then eating food just before going to bed, you're going to mess up your leptin. You can't just use cold thermogenesis and hope your leptin's going to be okay. But it's a massive help for people who are already adopting circadian lifestyles, or have weight issues, or insulin resistance, and are looking for another way to deal with it. Then for neurotransmitters, if you use cold thermogenesis, even just a cold face plunge, it can release things like oxytocin, and that's a hormone, again, really high up in the hormone hierarchy. So it can basically boss other hormones around that are under it. And you can release oxytocin other ways, like having a cuddle or an orgasm, or cuddling a pet. But a cold face plunge is like a sort of biological way you can just do by yourself. But it also, when you do cold exposure, you also release noradrenaline and dopamine. And this is really important for overcoming addictions or depression or something like binge eating, because it's providing your body with another source of a pleasurable hormone, neurotransmitter. And again, with addictions, I found with people, if they stop doing one thing, the pathway to be addicted to something's still open. So you either need to plug people into the sun, because there's a different pathway of why we get addicted to the sun, or plug them into cold thermogenesis, because it's another way to get the dopamine, which they're either trying to get from, there's all sources, whether it's food or drugs or pornography or whatever people, or even their phone, which is a blue light emitting device that steals dopamine. So you need to provide people with another way, and it's a way to unlock your own pharmacy in your head. And then on a deeper layer in the mitochondria, with the electron transport chain, there are 5 proteins, and the electrons go down, and they're sort of the wire. You've got the ATPase that spins, and that's like the magnetism part of a mitochondria. And the ATPase makes ATP, and then complex 4 makes the deuterium depleted water. And in the way physics works is, the closer something is together, the better it's going to work. So exposing yourself to cold actually contracts the electron transport chain, because it cools water down, or it cools you down, and when water gets colder, it expands. So it can change everything in quantum biology is counterintuitive, and it took me a while to work it out, because I just thought originally you just froze the mitochondria and they contracted, but it's sort of mediated by water. So what happens basically with cold thermogenesis, you can make your mitochondria work better. And this has been studied over and over and over and proven. So it's a route into having a better current running through your mitochondria. Then the ATPase is going to spin better, so you get better magnetism. Then you're going to get more ATP, which is useful for running certain functions in the body, and then more water. And also because the heat comes from the fact the mitochondria are being more efficient, and they make more infrared, which is going to structure the deuterium depleted water into the EZ. So it's basically a win-win on so many levels. And then on an even deeper level, again, cold thermogenesis is a way to make low intensity ultraviolet light in the body. And ultraviolet light, the UVA, is how we make melanin from the sun. So that's the melanin we have on our skin. We've also got melanin inside the body, which is called neuromelanin. And that's kind of the really important melanin. And when you start to lose this melanin, you're wide open to every kind of sort of brain disorder you can imagine, from Parkinson's to autism to, well, everything, because there's the most amount of neuromelanin is in the brain, but then it's in lots of other places in the body, especially in the nervous system. And this idea of losing melanin, or melanin migration or remodeling, is really important for people who think they've tried everything and they've never looked at melanin. So it has so many layers of why it's important. And also you can draw upon the melanin in your skin. Say if me or you got a tan and then we were exposed to some time in the UK, like 3 weeks, which happened when there was no sun at all, we can suck the melanin in from the skin, and we can use that as a backup for what melanin can do in the body. But then the cold is actually a way to make the melanin from the inside. So it does come back to the as above and so below, as within and so without. So it's something, again, we've got the sun out here, but then we've got our little mini suns, the mitochondria, inside. And the cold thermogenesis is a really good way to get this sort of boost in internal light in the body. So that, again, because biophotonics is quite a difficult subject to study, because we don't have sufficient technology yet, there is still enough. And it was proven sort of 50 years ago about biophotonics anyway. And there are bits of studies, especially in genetics, about biophotonics and call it micro-optics. And it's just, again, once people know about it, and technology is always improving, there's definitely going to be soon ways to detect all of this different light show happening inside the body. But then, as a take-home message for people, cold thermogenesis is pretty much like going out in the sun. The benefits are just so numerous, and luckily in the UK we have plenty of coal, so you can do it. And we can't do anything about the sun sometimes, but you can find ways to do cold exposure. And obviously there are protocols and ways to go into it, but that's kind of beyond the scope of the podcast. It's more just making people aware of it. The other thing about the UK is, because I'm here in the US and there's noise all the time, and it's just that's just how it is. Like, there's leaf blowers or people building things, and their noise laws are different to ours. You can dig and run JCBs from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. and people neglect the fact that sound as a phonon can travel sort of through water, and it's a sound, and how that communicates in the body is a whole other podcast as well. But when it's noisy and we don't have ear flaps or ear lids, we can't do anything about the noise, and it's constantly there stressing people out and pushing their cortisol up a bit. And our brains are quite good at sort of zoning stuff out, so consciously we don't notice the annoying noise, but our biology is constantly being provoked by it. It's a bit like the blue light, that unless you know about how blue light raises your cortisol and blood sugar and insulin, you probably never noticed, but that can be there provoking you on top of noise. And luckily in the UK we can buy as many incandescent light bulbs as we want, whereas they have been outlawed in a lot of states in the US. So we can buy or change our lighting because I know that sometimes it's hard to go outside, or you have to, or you need to work. And then the other aspect, that just regarding winter in general, we've got a lot more darkness, and we tend to do our healing and our autophagy and apoptosis via melatonin in the dark. And sometimes you just have to teach your body to go to bed a bit earlier and sleep a bit longer, and sort of from a setting goals perspective, what I tend to do now is do my sort of recovery and planning and stuff and recharging in the winter, and then use the summer for like pushing forwards and trying to get PBs in sports, and then use the extra darkness and extra melatonin to do a sort of reset, because again melatonin is going to run apoptosis and autophagy, so that's when you're recycling and then clearing out old and damaged cells, repairing the mitochondria, nipping in the bud like little cancerous cells starting up, and all sorts of other things. And if you take a melatonin supplement, it might help you sleep, but it doesn't do all of the other effects because the supplement you bought in the factory wasn't made by you. It hasn't been programmed by sunlight. So yes, I agree, it does make people go to sleep, and you get that effect from synthetic melatonin, but the other effects I described, and it does even more again, because it regulates things like luteinizing hormone and all sorts of other things, that the factory version is just a good way to make your body shut down its own production. But I think Andrew Huberman made a video about don't take melatonin supplements. And sometimes my view is if you've got jet lag and you're going to take it for 3 days, it doesn't matter. Or if you've, say, got horrific insomnia because of a really stressful thing happened, and then you're just calming down and you just really need one good night's sleep, because I wouldn't categorically say it's dangerous, but then if you're using it all the time, it's like using any hormone all the time. You're going to shut down your own production. But like everything in medicine, it does have its place, but it's just being abused, I think, and giving it to children is just crazy because it controls sex hormones. Purity. So, but again, the UK being and other places where it's sort of the sun sets at 4:30 and doesn't surface again till 7:30 or 8 o'clock, you've got a massive window of darkness. And there are books on, I think it's called, I can't remember, it's like something like Dark Healing or Heal in the Dark by an MD. And it's not available on Amazon, you have to look for it, but he's got lots of protocols about using the dark. And it's really good for people who've got bipolar because it can help with sort of calming down the manic phase, or very anxious people. And also cortisol is a light hormone. So the more light that you are exposed to, the more cortisol you'll make. So if you take the light away completely, melatonin's on the other side of the seesaw. So it's a way people can control their cortisol as well. So I think, and also regarding different countries and how the medical system runs, I've had a real eye-opener here about, in the US, about the just complete sort of cosh medicating without and really pushing things, whereas in the UK, depending on your GP or your doctor, sometimes they won't even prescribe you anything. Like they'll just say, "Oh, just let it go away by itself," or you'll come away with one medication, not 3. And it was because you asked for it. I think they got a bit more into prescribing during COVID because there were so many problems, and they had to speak to their patients over the phone, and all they could do was prescribe. But I think it's like the melatonin that I think something like 80% of pharmaceuticals affect our circadian rhythm in some way because the circadian rhythm is so complicated, and things like antidepressants are going to mess up your serotonin pathway, because we can make serotonin ourselves in the morning in UVA light, and then using endocannabinoids like CBD and other things, we have our own endocannabinoid system that's light activated in the UVA morning. So all of these medications, again, all link back to circadian biology, and a lot of things could be fixed if doctors were more aware of how simple quantum biology is, because it's not being a bad doctor to tell people to get up in the morning and go outside and go for a walk. It's kind of doing them a favor, even if the patient doesn't want to hear that. That's probably the best thing that they can do. And then the other aspect about the UK is we've got like loads of pavements, so we can just walk everywhere whenever we want. And in the US, it's sometimes no pavement or only on one side. So even just going for a walk, which is just a simple thing that everybody can do, if they wanted to make it more quantum, they can wear grounding shoes. Even the ability to go for a walk is a chore where I am. I'm sure if it was more rural, it would be different. But then I think the majority, again, of people sort of live in cities. So I think I've really changed my mind about, I mean, I've never wanted to leave the UK, but I did have an issue with the weather and the sun. But then from going somewhere else where there is sun, I've realized we've got a huge amount of benefits in the UK, which other countries they don't have because they don't know about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good point that there's not ever a perfect place. Like different places will be better for different things, and I guess you have to decide what your priorities are and what you're kind of, I guess, then willing to put up with, which is not so good in that place. You mentioned that like it wouldn't be a bad thing if doctors were telling people to go outside but they just don't know that quantum biology is quite simple, I think you said. Why do you think like it's not more mainstream?
because you're not taught in medical school or in a biology textbook. You're told, oh, thyroid hormone does this, that, and the other, but nobody tells you. And you get told it's made out of tyrosine and iodine, but nobody tells you when it gets made and how. And I think that comes into seeing the sunrises and the UVA light, because when you see the sunrise, there's a particular blend of like blue and red light. And this is where it switches on hormones higher up in the cascade, like thyrotropin releasing hormone. And then there are other sort of hormones in the pituitary gland that are going to then switch on other hormones downstream. And they're not taught that in medical school or in a biochemistry textbook. You're just told these hormones are there and they do this. Whereas a lot of the time, if you could, and also the other thing about, you're taught about cell cycles and how terrible it is if the cell cycle gets messed up, because you're going to have, potentially cancer and dysregulated biochemistry. But then you're not told that the cell cycle is completely tied to the master clock, the SCN, which is completely tied to light. So if you mess up your circadian rhythm, you're going to mess up your cell cycle, and then you're opening yourself up to all sorts of deranged kind of biochemistry and cancer. But we're just taught there's a cell cycle. And the other factor is, I won't mention cancer now, but with the quantum biology, I think partly people think, oh, but the strange thing about it is, if people get the opportunity to see a sunrise, like, oh, wow, this is so beautiful and I love it and it's so wonderful and look at that. And it's just so obvious. It's like hiding in plain sight. And then also when it's really sunny, say in the morning before it gets too hot, people just go out and feel in a really good mood and just feel good. And again, it's so obvious. People don't think to say to their patients, you need to get into a regular sleeping cycle, and the best thing to do is just follow the sun as much as possible, and then go outside more, because the doctors would say for sort of fresh air, but I think they're missing the fact that there's that window in the morning to make all of these different hormones and neurotransmitters, because they've got medicines that they can just give, like you can give people thyroid hormone or an SSRI, or people would use other things, whereas that they don't realize that you've got your own personal pharmacy. And like anything, it's not necessarily their fault, but they should question more, why are my patients getting worse, and why am I writing more and more and more prescriptions? And then I think fundamentally as humans, like I've got friends who are doctors, they really like nature and going on holiday to a sunny place, but for some reason they can't seem to link it back to their medical practice. And also it can be just the pressure of being a general practitioner or a family doctor, that the patient has come in and they want to leave with a balloon or a drug or something's a bit serious. And if you just tell them what I just said, or start seeing the sunrises, go outside more in the morning, the patient's going to get very angry because their friend went to a different doctor and got a pill, and they were told to go outside. Although, however, doctors in the 1930s and 40s were much more into just get more sunshine and go outside. So it's not like they used to do that. That was their recommendation. Go by the seaside was a big, very popular cure for things in the UK for a long time. Again, with the ocean and the benefits that holds. And I think it's just moved into procedural, like referrals to a consultant or just giving people a pill, because that's what the patient's expecting, even though the best thing for them would be to fix their circadian rhythm, because that's at the base of everything. And obviously food's important as well. And I'm not going to go into the food pyramid and stuff like that, but I think the circadian rhythm is more important to teach doctors about and patients, because even if somebody doesn't know anything about nutrition, they know they're not supposed to eat McDonald's and chocolate and ice cream all day. They know anyway, but they've got no concept of seeing the sun and blocking blue light, which is probably more destructive than what they're eating. And it doesn't, if a doctor understood everything, it's actually really safe for them, because you can't really hurt yourself with quantum biology. Whereas even though I do ketogenic diets with people, you can do it wrong, and weird things can happen, and you can have ab reactions to supplements, even something simple like folate or vitamin B12, or people have ab reactions to pharmaceuticals all the time. So with quantum biology, it's really safe because you can't possibly hurt yourself. And I think it would give doctors like a safety net as well, because and the other factor is the compliance, because I don't know how often they would see the doctor and whether the doctor could check up. But it's just a matter of like it requires re-education, and that's why I'm very into the science side, because scientifically all of this makes perfect sense, and it's been studied and proven in different species and humans anyway. So all the data's there if they want to go and look at it. Whereas anything to do with food, nutrition studies are just terrible, because most of them are epidemiological anyway. So I can understand why people constantly fight about food, and doctors are edgy about, saying to people, oh, it's okay to eat red meat, it's good for you. They're edgy. Whereas you can't refute that getting more sunshine and less artificial light, and get off your phones or minimize your tech use and stop watching Netflix as much, is going to have a big benefit. And it's just a very safe suggestion for a doctor to make. They can't possibly get sued. They can get shouted at by the patient, but in terms of their career and safety and hurting somebody, they can't possibly do that.
Yeah, I think that's like a good kind of model. If like people are struggling, it's like kind of go back to how we kind of evolved and how we would naturally be. Like the light makes sense, I guess some of the diet stuff, but being outside, sun, in nature. I think we said about the pill, people want pills. I think they just want like the quick fix really, and they don't want to, I guess they think it's hassle to go out in the sun, but like you said, it's almost too obvious. But
also you feel instantly straight away, you feel good instantly in the sun as well. It's like, and you feel instantly good doing cold. It's just nobody's told people. Even red light, getting a red light panel, you can feel instantly better. So I know what you mean about if people are desperate, they just want a pill.
Yeah. I saw you did a podcast with my friend Sam Al-Katan recently. And I think this is when I was speaking to him. He was saying that the reason he kind of thinks science is quite valuable is because like what we really want for like personally, like for each person, is we want to feel better. But he says the science is almost like a way to convince yourself that what you're doing is actually working, and also to kind of convince other people. Because if you just say to people, oh, I feel better, then they might not, like, they're like, okay, it probably wouldn't work for me. But if you can like show them these studies that like proves it, then they might be more likely to take it seriously.
Yeah, that can be taken both ways, because having worked in research science, there's lots of problems with it, with the desk drawer publications, really important papers we just never got around to publishing because the grant ran out, or somebody left, or the project student or the PhD finished. So there's missing bits of information, but also there's publication bias as well. And also when you come to want to apply for funding, there are certain hot topics and certain not interested topics, and you can't get funding to try and debunk somebody. They want things to be novel. So they don't like, in science, if you try and reproduce other people's data, you find out that sort of 80% of it's not reproducible. And these are sort of studies that are in things like Nature and Science as well. So and you can't get a grant to try and debunk stuff that's been published in the past because it's not novel. So again, this business of constantly wanting novelty means that we miss fully researching the bloody obvious, like the sun, and things like that. But also, yes, it does, for certain people, they will be convinced by a paper, maybe sort of somebody like a doctor or another scientist. But also everything, I have a friend who's a doctor, and I always say to her all the time, you just got to try stuff. It's all experiential, because if you think about other things which people use, say illegal drugs and stuff like that, that there isn't any papers saying, oh, it's going to give you these amazing feelings. They just try it and really like it, and they just know. And also about, exercising, you don't really need any kind of study to show that just moving. I don't necessarily mean being a professional athlete, but you don't need to have a study to show that doing natural human movement, stretching a bit, walking, you just feel better. And there are also people that are actually really anti-science, and doctors and people that can't understand it anyway, and they need to be. And those people don't necessarily want a pill. They actually sometimes know, they just tell me, I don't understand anything about science. I don't want any pills or gadgets. I just want to have something to do, and I'll do it. And I'll do whatever you say. And that's where, when being a Pilates teacher was actually quite useful, because there's obviously not a single study ever on Pilates, yet GPs send people to Pilates now, and people come to Pilates and yoga classes because they've got bad backs and posture and necks and sore ankles, and lots of people, it goes away. So they tell other people, or they just keep coming because they tried it. And again, that there isn't a single study, and even doctors will tell people to go to Pilates now if they get a bad back, rather than referring them to an MRI, because most of the time with it, it's mechanical back pain, but that can be quite a quantum biology problem as well, because it sort of ties into collagen. So it's, and the same with hypnotherapy and stuff like that. There are studies on using hypnosis for pain and things, but people will still just go anyway, because if they're a good subject for hypnosis, they're going to get hypnotized and come out feeling different, and something happened. And then, of course, there are people who think it's all like a load of quackery and mumbo jumbo. But also, you can overanalyze things so much and do so much of your own research, you don't actually take any action, because you actually have to do something, and you have to do it consistently, even if it's not perfect. Even with diet and exercise and quantum stuff and Pilates and stuff, we all have times when we can't do something, or we went to a party, but it's about consistency as well, and not constantly trying to find the new best thing. Just do the basic stuff for a given amount of time, and do it consistently, and you will see results. Not keep looking for, oh, there must be a better red light panel, or there must be a bigger cold plunge I can buy. Just use what you've got and do it consistently, or do it more often.
Yeah, I think those are some really good points, actually. Yeah, I think that's also true that I think as long as you're good, like, I don't know, like 95% of the time, so we have an arbitrary number, but something like that's where you're going to see like most of the benefit. Like you were saying before, if someone takes melatonin for 3 days, then you don't think that's going to have like catastrophic effects on them. It's kind of what you do most of the time that's going to lead to your final outcomes, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And also, some people, there's always going to be the perfectionist that they get so stressed out about somebody turned a light on, or they ate a piece of bread because they went to a friend's house and they didn't want to offend them, that they actually make so much cortisol. It's worse than the thing they did wrong. And also, stuff happens all the time. Like if there are children around, that they're always going to do something or get ill in the night, or and what I've learned here is you kind of learn quite well what is a good needle mover and the non-negotiables, and what stuff, okay, if I miss doing that, it's not the end of the world. And again, like you said, it's not, life is unpredictable, and if you get massively stressed out about every time you make a mistake, that kind of reflects part of the person, and you've got to sometimes just accept that you failed, because I ordered it wrong, and I've failed and done things wrong so many times, you can't possibly imagine that if I eat something I wouldn't want to because it's really important for a friend because they cooked it for me, it's like, well, I've done it now. And then, like, we had an incident here where we were all up till about 11 o'clock, and we totally ruined the whole light, and we had to make phone calls and things like that, and be on phones ungrounded when we should have been in bed like 3 hours ago. And it was like, well, it's happened now, we're just going to have to just deal with it. And I think the other thing is not to keep telling yourself you made a mistake, because the following day, like, the dad was like totally chilled, because he'd kind of he was like, and me and my friend went on for about 3 hours how we'd had such a bad sleep, and then we gave ourselves a bad mood and felt tired because we'd kept telling ourselves we hadn't slept. Whereas if something else had happened, which it did later on that day, we all had to concentrate, it was a work thing, magically my friend and I just felt completely normal, like better. We were properly focused. So I think that sometimes if you do something wrong and focus on it, whether it's a light or a food, or you didn't ground, or you forgot to put your phone in airplane mode, or you had devices in your room plugged in by accident, it doesn't matter, just forget about it, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jack Kruse said on Tetragrammaton that like you kind of do the best that you can, and then when you know better, do better. And it's like exactly what you just said there, basically.
And always there's always stuff I can do better, and things I haven't tried yet, because it's like I'll do the best I can, and as I get older I get more strict with things, because I don't want, I know I'm going to, like, I accept my mortality. It's just I want to feel the same as I do now for as long as possible. So you automatically become stricter just by choice, because you don't feel so good, and it becomes automatic. And yeah, you have to do the best you can with the environment you've got. Like, I can't get a massive cannon and get rid of all that digging that constantly goes on over there, but I can not go and look at a cat video or on Instagram, or check something twice. It's like I don't need to check in an hour how well my reel is doing. Just leave it alone. So no matter what, there's always something that you can do. No matter how much money you've got or not got, you can always do better. So I totally agree that people, I think they just need to have a big suite of options, because some people are not going to resonate with EMF protection for ages because they think it's sort of foiled hat territory. However, they might be really sensitive to noise, so they're going to gobble up every single tip I'm going to give them about noise, do all of it and feel better, and then later they might come round to something that people will accept the sun, and then whether they'll do it all the time, that's another thing. And then later they may then think, okay, the sound thing worked for me, the sun thing worked for me, now I'm ready to listen about my tech and my phone. Whereas if I'd have tried to get them off the phone straight away, they wouldn't have spoken to me, because it didn't resonate with them. Because like you say, you get more into different parts of quantum biology as you go through it, because coming from sort of a more like a spiritual background, like, it's evolved into like every kind of religion it can possibly be, but the sort of the water aspect, sometimes the living water can be attributed to the Holy Spirit and the sort of holy water. And then again, light is massively important in all religions and in Genesis, and then angels are made of light. So people tend to, and then with magnetism, that can be grounding, and then the way in which crystals work. So people are going to come into quantum biology on a different leg. Like with my mum and dad, they already were into water because they filter it, and they won't use plastic. And I've never even told them ever about it. They just started off with water, and they don't like processed food, because they like food that the water, it's fresh. And my dad likes gardening and plants and stuff like that. So they came in the water route. And then my mum's frightened of the sun and probably would wear sun cream inside if she'd read that thing. But my dad took on board the sunrises and the UVA thing as soon as I told him, and he just does it because he likes it, and he can get away from my mum as well. Whereas the magnetism side about technology and crystals and grounding, I'm not sure if my dad would take that on board, because he's done two things already. Whereas my mum, even as soon as mobile phones came out, she called them the brain fryer. And with hers, she's the classic, what's the point of having a phone if it's never on? So it's kind of the thing, different people are going to be able to implement and latch on to different parts. Because my mum's 80 or nearly 80, so why does she need a phone? She doesn't know how to use any of the apps. I mean, she can write a WhatsApp and take a phone call, but other than that, to her, it's just a phone. So she does do stuff right. I mean, she does go on a laptop too much, but then, that's not as bad nearly as being on the phone.
Yeah, you mentioned EMF a lot there. Can you kind of unpack what problems do you see with EMF, non-native EMF?
Oh yeah, so with the non-native EMFs, it's like our biology's evolved to work with the natural spectrum of the sun. So that would be ultraviolet up to infrared, and it's like the 10 to the 36 different gears that our biology works with. And then over sort of the past of 120 years or so, we've added in electromagnetism that's not natural. So our biology isn't used to these different frequencies. And for example, with the mitochondria, if you expose them to non-native EMFs, I won't go into it in particular. First of all, you affect how calcium is metabolized in them and other cells, so that can be destructive. But also the main problem with technology is it steals our water, so it's the dehydration factor. So it's almost like very slowly microwaving yourself. And like I said right at the beginning, the way that the water in our body, the main purpose of the mitochondria is to make water and light, and they make sort of a magnetic field as well. So if you're stealing sort of 15 to 20% of this really important precious water that they're making, you're affecting every single organ and cell system in the body. The brain and how that works is a quantum computer. And just for simplicity, if you think about an iPhone, that's a quantum computer. Like you're putting an extremely powerful electronic device that can blast out way more frequencies, and half of them we don't understand, right by our quantum computer. And that's where all of these things to do with sort of depression and ADHD and these unusual sort of psychiatric problems that people are experiencing. So that would be part of, because the non-native EMFs can also affect our frontal lobe. So that's people being able to make decisions, be able to override unwanted behaviors. So sort of snapping at something, getting offended really easily. That's one aspect of it. It's also the fact that from a biological point of view, metabolically, when in India people have good sun, they eat sort of carbs and a vegetarian diet, and as soon as they started building 5G towers and things to test them there, they all became sort of diabetic, the skinny diabetics, like the type 2s, and the only thing that had changed was they brought the 5G towers and all of the EMF. So it affects our metabolism as well. And also when I look at patients' labs and things, and they like are a healthy person, and I see high triglycerides and high blood sugar, I know it's a mixture of EMFs and blue light, and it's usually both. But then that's something again, because people, once you start to get down the insulin resistance pathway, we don't dispute for 1 minute that insulin resistance is the root of lots of other metabolic diseases and a really good environment for cancer and dementia. So that's one thing that bothers me about non-native EMFs. Then, of course, there's obviously controversy about sort of new medications, and we don't know the effect that these particular sort of procedures are going to have on people. But then when we add non-native EMFs on top of that, it changes the way sort of viruses and other and sort of ways you could inoculate against microorganisms work. And I think there's a lot of correlation between, as soon as you add a brand new EMF or electromagnetism, like in the Second World War, our technology jumped. And then there were other periods before that, and then it always correlates with some kind of viral or epidemic of some sort. And then again, when 5G got rolled out, all of a sudden there was another pandemic. So there's some way in which microorganisms and viruses react or behave in non-native EMFs, unless it just weakens us and we're just more sensitive to them. And then again, you've got things like Lyme and mold and stuff like that. And I don't think it's actually them, because we've lived with mold and in moldy houses, and people have eaten mold ever since we've existed. And I think there's the non-native EMFs don't only affect us, they affect the microorganisms, but it's just a general extra stressful thing on our bodies, because according to the mitochondria, back to noise again, they're used to seeing like a rainbow of light coming from the sun and being transduced to them. When we add all of these non-native frequencies, it's like white noise, that this like the digging or some really irritating fridge buzzing in the background. And to the mitochondria, the non-native frequencies act like white noise, and it just makes them function worse. Like, we function worse when we're constantly being distracted by a noise or some kind of thing which we're not used to. So there's that level. So I think also because they weaken the mitochondria in that way, just making them less efficient, it messes up calcium signaling. So that's terrible for anybody with any sort of cardiac situations. And people tend to use their phone here so that it's going right in, and our heart's like this giant vortexing magnet. So that there's numerous ways in which technology is a problem. And even if people want to go and look in the research, there are more and more things appearing. There's not huge amounts, but you've got to remember how wealthy Apple and IBM and all of these companies are, that they're not, when it comes to science, it's whoever's got the biggest funder wins. So there just isn't, there's limited funding in order to actually check these devices and these EMFs fully. I mean, there's the book, The Invisible Rainbow, if people wanted to read, because I can't remember the name of the MD that wrote it, but that's all based on studies, not just telling a story. And that's a really good place to understand this properly. Also, what people could do is, if they don't believe me or whatever, then get rid of the EMFs. Like in the UK, the way our fuses work in sort of certain houses of a certain year, you can turn the fuse off upstairs or in your bedroom, so you can sleep without any electricity in the walls, because that's another monster. The phone is the biggest monster. Bluetooth is pretty bad. Then the electricity in the walls is another one that really gets to people. And sometimes if they can just do that, so many people have just said, oh, I just slept so much better, I didn't realize. And then with children and bad behavior, or adults who get anxiety or mood swings, just have a week of like no phone or less phone, or phone in airplane mode, and just see if you feel better. Because I get way more irritated and cranky and agitated if I have to use the phone a lot. And sometimes you can't help it. But again, it's just one of these just suck it and see kind of situations. And there are plenty of things that people can do for cheaply in their houses about EMFs. Even just unplug devices that you're not using. Don't have lights on when you don't need them. It also saves electricity bills as well. So it's, again, blocking EMFs and being careful with technology. I found that I actually I have a lower electricity bill anyway, and people are always looking for ways to budget. Even if people are wealthy, that's why they're wealthy sometimes, because they are mindful of their budget, and also the environment as well. A lot of people are mindful of that. So the less technology you use, the less that you cause a problem there. So there's lots of opportunities. It's back to what you said at the beginning. Yes, people can try to find studies to say, oh, it's nonsense, but then you have to look at who paid for the study, who funded it. And it's all back to, if people have got problems and they're complaining to me about problems, then just try out what I've suggested and see if it helps, rather than constantly complaining about your problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much about this at all, to be honest, of the whole quantum biology thing, but I heard like France recently recalled the iPhone 12 for giving out too much radiation. So I'm open to the fact that, yeah, there might be something going on here, because it is essentially invisible, like we can't see, but it's like frequencies that are like hitting us constantly. But how do we know that the EMF is affecting the mitochondria?
Because it's just to do with the way that of evolution, that evolution's so fine-tuned, and basically everything pivots around the melanin and the mitochondria making a light show amongst themselves. And as soon as you add in, because like you said, all it is invisible light. Now you've added in a load of other light, it's just confusing for it, because it'll detect it, because we're an extremely good photomultiplier. And in terms of physics, as soon as you get confusion or mess in the body, you've now created chaos. And that's just another way, that's a way a physicist would describe inflammation. So it's going to confuse them, it's chaotic, because also the way in which waves can interact with one another. So the EMFs themselves can interact with light, and they can interact with other ways our body, we can transmit information in the body sort of vibrationally as well. Then we've got the way in which sound travels through. And if we've got extra, because with these waves, the shorter wavelengths are obviously more problematic than the longer ones, because they're more powerful. So what they're doing is they're just getting in the way and making things less smooth and organized and coherent in the body. So we've got now incoherence, which again would just be another way of describing chaos. and then that translates in biology to inflammation. And inflammation is a bit like a bad body clock or insulin resistance. There's like a million papers telling you that if you've got lots of inflammation, you're not going to feel good mentally or physically or for your lifespan.
Sure. And then what kind of frequencies are we talking about? Because I know microwaves are kind of longer, they come after infrared, but you talked about the smaller wavelengths are worse, so that would be kind of towards the UV, X-ray, gamma end of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yes, yeah, those ones, it's like the craziness of cancer treatment is the one thing we know is definitely a carcinogen are X-rays, but then you get up into other frequencies. I mean, things like Wi-Fi and phones that, like up into the gigahertz. And I think it just gets into the territories. I mean, I'm not an expert in this actual type of physics. I just know more of a practical view of these devices emit these wavelengths, and you need this detector, because some people, you can measure all of this yourself. So you can, like Ghostbusters, you can or looking for radioactive things. So you can measure them all. So that makes it easy for the public to drop them down a bit. So we can just say we've sort of got Bluetooth is bad, because usually when you use a Bluetooth device, you're touching it. Like this is Bluetooth, but it's turned off at the moment. It's like, and I'm just testing. But if I have to activate it via the phone or say an Aura ring, my phone is blasting me, and then these are communicating, and I'm touching it. So Bluetooth often is because we touch parts of it, and that's a problematic. Then again, the phone, because the phone emits sort of so many different, because the phone's like a receiver, and it gives out, and it does Wi-Fi, and it does like telephone calls, and it does Bluetooth. So that's why the phone is the most problematic. But then not to bother people, but there's actually like another kind of non-native EMF coming out, and it is out already, like in the millimeter sort of size. That sort of the cars that can park themselves. The EMFs that they use, it has to project out of the car so it can detect the pavement and motion. It has motion sensors for other cars and pedestrians, but then also the way in which the car needs to communicate with the pavement is there are these things that a very experienced EMF surveyor, Sarah Hodgson, was showing me when we went to London. So, and we don't know whether we don't know enough about how much does this project out of the car, because it has to talk to the lamppost, because the sensors are there to tell you where the pavement is, so that nobody knows how much this affects the driver or the pedestrians that the car goes past. So no matter what with technology, there's always more. So I mean, 6G is on its way. So there's, no matter what, we keep getting like bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's not just the small fast ones, because they can be ionizing. The big ones, the long wavelength ones are going to have impacts as well. And also we keep inventing new EMFs to add to the EMF soup. And the other problem with them is because of the ozone layer and all of the stratosphere and everything around the Earth, they go up and they bounce back down again, so we can't get them out. But certain ones like do go out of, I can't remember which one. I think that some of the long wavelength ones get out, but then some can go out the hole in the ozone layer. But that's the other problem, is as we make them, it's not like cooking a saucepan and the steam just goes. It's all bouncing back in again. So that's why I think a lot of people, and especially Jack, talks about living in a blue lit microwave world. And then we keep inventing more. But it's something for people, because it can really alarm them, this thing they can't see. But we have had graded exposure to it, because we didn't suddenly just arrive and have to use a 5G phone. There was obviously light bulbs first, and then radio waves, and then we've been gradually exposed to it, which probably causes problems. But then again, as humans and all organisms, we do develop resistances to things over time. But I do definitely think the whole technology evolution just really has to stop. And, we have to just, like you said before, go backwards again and maybe get more in touch with nature again, because we're just delving so much now into sort of technology we don't fully understand. We have sort of new approaches to dealing with viruses that is all new technology, and that doesn't interact very well with EMFs. It'll be worse when we have 6G. So I think it's worth, even if people think it's a load of woo-woo, it's something that is still worth learning about, because you want to protect your family from things. And even if you just do something like limit screen time for children, you're doing them a massive favor, because our skulls and our blood-brain barriers are formed and thicker, whereas children, their blood-brain barriers and skulls are different to ours. So they're just even more susceptible to iPads and phones than we are, because I suppose, we grew up and had a Nokia first, and then someone who just arrives in the world just gets like a 6G or iPhone 12 or something, and it's like a big blast. So it is something that people, it's basically an inconvenient truth, and that's why people get so angry if you talk about it. Because the other thing that I go absolutely crazy about is people having wireless earphones or ear pods, because it's just basically putting a load of really concentrated electromagnetism right into your brain and into your temporal lobes. And then again, with the way our senses work, all of our senses have a layer of sort of melanin over them, because melanin also acts as a receiver. So it's not just wrecking the melanin, it's also blasting frequencies into your brain because it's so close. And the good thing about electromagnetism is distance is your friend, and sometimes just being away from something is enough, because I've got different meters to measure. So even though all of this stuff's still around, you can always find places where it's fine to be, or you can put an offending, say if you bought a computer and it happened to be emit a lot of EMF, you can get along cables and just push it away from you. So there's always distance is your friend. And then that's why the whole thing about the earbuds just drives me mad, or the earpods, because you've put it in the worst possible place imaginable, right in your ear. So it's even closer, because most people, occasionally people have their phone up to their heads, but if they can't hear properly, they actually do what I do and just have it on speaker and have it as far away as possible. So I think that's like a big take home, that even if people think they look trendy, the earbuds, that's the worst possible thing. So even if people just do change one thing, at least they are better than they were before, and maybe they'll change another thing in 3 weeks and another thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is entirely accurate, but I believe whatever it is emitting, whether or not it is actually like getting into our brain or affecting us, but it's an exponential scale, I believe. So if you have your phone like this close versus like, if you go twice the distance away, it's like way less. It's not like half.
Yeah, it's to the power of 6. It's the inverse 6th law. Because when I did my protein folding, I used to use dyes, and it's like you say, it's to the power of 6, not to the power of 1. So yeah, like here is like
a lot better,
semi-acceptable. Whereas whereas if it's you don't have to like talk with your phone over there. Like here you're kind of out of the field, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's correct. Definitely, it's to the power inverse 6th power, not just the power of 2.
Yeah. One thing you said about the car using like millimeter wavelengths, I'm not sure, but first came to mind, I would assume that it would not like it wouldn't penetrate humans, because if it's like a kind of like a radar, it's sending out and then bouncing back off of like pavements or lampposts, like it has to be hitting it and then bouncing back. If it was penetrating, it would just go through, right?
Yeah, true. I think it's one of these things. It doesn't necessarily have to penetrate us. It's basically our biology and our consciousness, which isn't in the body, and other things have been evolved to work in a electromagnetic environment that doesn't have these alien frequencies. So no matter what, and I don't understand it, how it works, but our whole mind, body, and spirit are not used to it, because we made it, and it's going to disturb something. And what exactly, I don't know. But on the other hand, speaking of radars, I live close to an airport. It's 2 miles away in the UK, and anything that sweeps, they've done a experiment where I think it was with aphids and stuff, and every time the sweep went through, all the aphids did that. So these pulsating, like sort of radar detectant like ones have a different problem, because it's not just constantly straight at you. It's like oof, and then so every time I'm in my house, probably every time the sweep goes looking for aeroplanes, there'll be like this little micro disturbance, and I don't notice, but then again my biology does. And I think that's the problem with non-native EMFs. It's not like, you know, accidentally touching like the cooker and you hurt yourself. It's like the 1,000 cuts is what kills a person, not one giant one. And because, like you say, it's invisible, we can't feel it straight away. Yes, some people, it can make them feel irritated, but it could be a million reasons why they feel irritated. And then some people are genuinely electrosensitive, so they're just like a big canary. So you can just take them around and they'll tell you where the EMFs are and aren't. And I think it's all comes down to other things, that the better state of health you're in, the better redox you've got, the more water you've got that your mitochondria have made, the more protection you've got from these waves. It's just an extra thing on top of pollution and noise and things like that to sort of wear us down. And because of these sort of stressors, like exactly as you say, we don't notice because it's cumulative, or it might take years, or it might often things synergize one another. That, you know, if you remove one factor from the equation, you don't get as affected by the other factors. So yeah, I'm not saying to people it's like all doom and gloom and you're all going to, you know, die. I'm just saying they exist, and whether you want to believe me or not, I just think it's a good idea to just do things that are sensible to protect yourself, because it's like new technology, and we haven't got any data because it's not been there long enough. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just want to say, like, I think I said earlier that, like, I think if you're like struggling or like you're not feeling as well as you could, that you should go back to nature. I wouldn't say I'm like anti-technology. I think technology can be it's definitely helped in many ways, but I think we just need to like kind of proceed with caution, and I guess we need to like take an honest look at everything that we are developing and seeing, like, is this actually having a negative effect on us?
oh no, I agree. The thing is, we wouldn't be here if we couldn't have technology, and I run a business that's internet based, and so yes, of course it's really important. And obviously for healthcare and stuff, I'm more about the unnecessary use of, and then it's the same with food. Like personally, like there's lots of things I wouldn't eat, but if somebody eats a burger once a week, who cares? It's more if people are eating burgers every day, or if people are on Netflix for like 4 hours a day, because it's just like, you know, we've got so much, we're overloaded with pleasure these days. And a lot of it is, you've just got to learn how to just be moderate, but also because these pleasurable things like Netflix and phones, blue light depletes your dopamine. So there's actually a biological reason why people get addicted to their phone or addicted to Netflix. And yes, there are amazing programs on there, I don't deny that, and there's like loads of really amazing, delicious food. But I think you've got to learn to make things a treat. Because like, I suppose when I was a child, going to the cinema was like a massive, like big event to watch a film. And other than that, we just had like a TV with sort of interesting children's TV programs from the 80s on it. So it's all about the hedonistic aspect and constantly wanting to pleasure ourselves. And, you know, I've like done, you know, who doesn't want to feel pleasure? What I've been saying is there's loads of ways to reset your dopamine system, and then use nature to make dopamine and all these chemicals. So you can get high on your own supply anyway. You just need to, and also like anything, if you just do something all the time, you're going to have like an addiction issue with it. Same with certain food, and you're going to have to go through some kind of withdrawal, but you'll not feel great at the time, but you'll feel better afterwards. And you don't know what you don't know, and it's really easy to just exist thinking this is how life is, and you don't know you could feel 10 times better, or think, oh, it's just the menopause, or oh, it's just my age, or you know, blame it on something else. So like, I totally agree with you that technology, I think it's fascinating as well. I think the innovation on the things that people have invented are just like they fascinate me. But it's, again, just don't become too dependent on it, and always be able to do it yourself without a pill or a machine or whatever, and really sort of harness nature. I mean, yes, sure, you know, if somebody, you can mix nature and technology, that if people must go on the phone, like if I go on, you know, I'll do my best to do it outside when I'm grounded, because I have to take a business call, or I need to talk to a client, or I need to edit a video. And some people I always have the window open when I'm working on technology. I'm not using blue blockers at the moment because I've got Iris on the computer, so I don't actually need them. But there's lots of things you can do and still use your technology. So and again, I think it's just moderation. I think it's just being aware that it's, and some people it's just genuinely that they're not, as soon as you tell them, they're like, oh, I didn't realize, I'm going to change now. And they're not, they don't fight me for 1 minute, and other people get very angry and say whatever. But it's like, I'm not trying to sell them anything, I'm just trying to help them. So it's, and I'm also like, in the interview I just did recently with Jack, we were both talking about, why do we even care about people? Why don't we just both go off and just try and make loads of money and just stuff everybody else? And people can watch the podcast and see the answer. But then one of the things I brought up is I really care about children, because they're completely dependent on the parents, and we can make a decision. And like I was saying, we know that we shouldn't really be watching TikTok at 11 p.m. at night or watching Netflix at 2 a.m. with a pizza. We know, really. Whereas with children, they'll just do whatever you give them. And that's sort of why I'm kind of putting the word out there. But again, like you say, it's all about giving people options and emphasizing it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to pay somebody 100 grand to do a load of stuff in your house for EMFs, which I don't really agree with at all. There's a lot of it you could just do it yourself. Same as changing your way of eating. You have to do it. Nobody can do it for you. And you can't pay somebody to make you eat different. Well, I suppose you can get a chef, but then the point is, we have a lot more control over our health, regardless of whether you live in the UK with no sun or in the US with kind of noise and its issues. There's still a lot we can control, but you just need to know why shouldn't I be doing this? How will I feel better? And then for some people, is this just made up, or is there science? And then you can make sort of changes in your life and stay away from out of the doctor's office and away from hospitals and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's great, Sarah, that giving people information, and then they can obviously make the choice how they see best fit. This has been a really interesting conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. So if people want to find more of your work, can you let them know where that is?
Oh yes, I go by Busy Superhuman on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And I have a website, and I do work with clients, and I also have a membership group that's very affordable, like it's monthly, and people can come and learn. And I will reply to comments and things on social media and stuff like that as well. But anyway, Owen, it's been really nice to speak to you, and I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, sure, we can do a part 2 or something, yeah. I'll put the links to all of your socials in the video description.
Oh, thank you. That'd be great. Yes. And then I'll do the same for you in my new Jack Kruse video and send people back to you if they haven't watched that one.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.